Like I stated in my announcement video, the world is becoming an even more scary place with right-wing ideology becoming more pronounced and governments the world over exercising power and control over the lives of the people without any thoughts to what we want and how life can be made better for those they've been called to serve. Instead, what we get is self-serving officials in every facet of government, running headlong into decisions that are designed to fuck us over in various ways, and that is the reason why for this year's Fuckathon weekend prompt, I chose Fuck Authoritarianism. Now, if you're someone who is just stumbling on this video for the first time and doesn't know what the Fuckathon is, the Fuckathon is a yearly readathon that I created about 3 years ago that takes place in July, where during the month we read books that are focused on calling out systems and establishments to which we want to say fuck you to. For this year, the readathon is only taking place on the last weekend of July. If you want more information, check my announcement video that will be linked in the description box. But other than that, let's get into my recommendations. I would like to point out though that as always, these recommendations are a mix of books I've read, books I haven't read yet but plan on reading, and books that some of my subscribers have mentioned in their comments as their choices for the readathon. I will start things off with Lynn Joseph's The Color of My Words, which is a story that celebrates the power of art in a system governed by authoritarianism and how in battling those feelings of helplessness and powerlessness by facing up with a government that is bulldozing its way through your life with one's art, you're able to give voice to and offer your own form of resistance. And we see this with our lead character Ana Rosa, a 12-year-old poet living under the authoritarian rule of Rafael Trujillo that squashed the freedom of expression of the citizens of the Dominican Republic. But Ana continues writing, continues to express herself, continues making art. It's a great middle grade pick for the readathon. Next on the list is the collection of short essays by Zimbabwean writer Panashe Chigumadzi, This Bones Will Rise Again, which is a short story essay collection aimed at decolonizing Zimbabwean history and by extension African history by taking us on a journey that starts with a coup that was not a coup that led to the ousting of Robert Mugabe and goes all the way back to the history and creation of Zimbabwe and the role women played in the birthing of the nation, even though their achievements are rarely ever mentioned in those conversations. This part modern history of Zimbabwe, part family essays and memoir, is feminist and political and historical and rings with the clarity of why I always say it is important that we are the ones who get to tell our stories. Now, can we actually talk about fuck authoritarianism without at least one book a lot of us read growing up making it to the list? Because let's be honest, George Orwell did see a lot of authoritarianism coming our way and he warned us in his satirical writings, but alas, humanity is doomed to not listen and just keeps making the same mistakes. And although I went back and forth on which of the two books I'd read to put on here, I finally went with Animal Farm. Mind you, 1984 also works brilliantly for this prompt as well, so you can pick whichever one you haven't read yet or want to reread. But the reason why Animal Farm made the list is because I remember reading it as a teenager and it hitting me that you can swap one authoritarian rule for another and not notice it whilst the system continues to put your nose to the grind and walk you to the ground, so you never get to raise your head and realize the truth of the situation. And I think considering the world we are presently living in, this is a very, very scary thing indeed. When we think of authoritarianism, we often look to oppressive governments, forgetting the fact that sometimes the authoritarian someone or a bookish character might be dealing with is right at home, which is where Tsitsi Dangarengba's nervous conditions comes in. Both Nyasha's father, Baba Mukuru, and Tambu's father, Jeremiah, govern their homes with an iron fist that sees them exercising complete authority over their daughters' lives to the detriment of what their daughters want and need. Baba Mukuru is very critical of Nyasha and tries to control every aspect of her life, loathing the way she speaks and eats, the food she eats, the friends she keeps. Any attempt that Nyasha makes to push back against her father's oppressive control has him lashing out at her with physical violence, to which she responds by pushing for more freedom for herself and what she wants. But we see the toll it takes on her mental health, and it further proves how insidious parental abuse is. Tambo, on the other hand, has to deal with her father insisting that she doesn't need an education even though she wants one, like her brother does, since she wouldn't cook books and serve them to her husband when she marries anyway. She also pushes back and is able to use her admiration for an older woman who is a master's holder as a driving force for her to get the education she wants, although she achieves this with the support of Baba Mukuru, which further drives home the irony that someone who is a savior to you might be an authoritative force in another person's life. I would like to add though that trigger warning for depiction of an eating disorder and parental abuse and violence. Next, I remember once reading about Las Mariposas, the butterflies. Apologies if I didn't get the pronunciation right. Three sisters, Patria, Minerva, and Maria Teresa Mirabal, who opposed and were very vocal about their opposition to the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo, and who were assassinated for it on November 25th, 1960. Theirs is a story that should always be told so every generation remembers, and Julia Alvarez tries to capture that with In the Time of the Butterflies, that serves as a memoir of sorts made up of stories of the three sisters and their last sister Dede to give us a glimpse into their lives under authoritarianism and just how oppressive governments work to silence dissenting voices. Now, we can't say fuck authoritarianism and not pay homage to the writer who made it an art form, who was imprisoned, punished, his family assaulted because he's vocal about his disdain for authoritarian rule, and his clarion call for African societies to wake up and demand for better governance and reject the system of governing that we currently have that would concentrate power in the hands of a few and take away the voices of the many. I am of course referring to Ngugu wa Thiong'o's satirical novel Wizard of the Crow, which is utterly brilliant. The agitation for change, the mockery of the present authoritarian and corrupt governments that a lot of African countries have, the realization that for things to change, everyone needs to be given a voice, the reminder that as much as an authoritarian might think they have power and can control everything, they actually can't. And like Animal Farm, a reminder to keep our eyes open so we don't replace one authoritarian rule for another. Next, there's just something about reading an autobiographical novel that makes the pain and fear hit different for you, and we can see that with Jilly Jiang's Red Scarf Girl, a memoir of the Cultural Revolution, where she takes us on a journey of just how quickly things can change under an authoritarian government, and how such governments often employ divide and conquer tactics to keep the various factions of the masses separated and turning against one another, so the focus isn't on the government itself, but on the innocent citizenry who in turn would tear themselves apart without realizing that they are fulfilling what the oppressive government wants. And then there's Fresh Tori Jan's middle grade novel Courage, My Story of Persecution, where she tells us about what life is like being a girl from an ethnic minority background in an Afghanistan that is ruled by the Taliban, and how her family and some of their friends faced various kidnapping, murder attempts, some that were successful, how her school was shut down, but how nevertheless she resisted and is today an activist who advocates for people from marginalized backgrounds like she is. Now, if you haven't read the series yet, then this might be a good time for you to read An Ember in the Ashes series by Sabata Hare, a series that takes place in a world inspired by ancient Rome, and to that effect operates an authoritarian government where to defy is to be killed and your family hunted down alongside you. And set in this world is a soldier and a slave, the two of them have the power to bring the whole system crumbling down. Then we have Hitler's Canary by Sandy Toksvig, and honestly reading that this middle grade novel is about the Danish resistance to German occupation and how actively everyone worked together to get Jewish folk out of Denmark to Sweden to protect them from the Germans had me like definitely making the list. Also, I'm pretty sure we can't explore books about characters saying fuck authoritarianism and rebelling against institutions that help the state enforce such a gross misuse of power on the people, and not mention The Hunger Games by Susan Collins. Katniss Everdeen brings an institution to its knees and topples a government with the help of a citizenry that decides that enough is enough and the capital will not be allowed to keep killing their children, turning their pain into a sport and keeping them confined to areas like they are passive lambs waiting to be slaughtered. We got a revolution and more with The Hunger Games, which is why it makes this list. Now, if you've read Pet by Akweke Emezi and haven't read Beta, the prequel of the book yet, then you should totally check it out. The book kicks things off by diving straight into people protesting excessive rule in Lucille, the town where the school Beta is starting at Eucalyptus is. It's a quick read if you want something really fast too, so that the weekend will fly by. Next, Surviving Autocracy by Masha Gensen is a non-fiction novel that explores just how quickly, within a few years as a matter of fact, people can change and a country can go from seeing itself as a nation built by immigrants to one where walls are being erected, countries are being put on a ban list, democratic institutions are being eroded, and a man like Trump could become the president of the country. Next is We Hunt the Flame by Asa Faisal, where we follow Zafira Nasir, living in the caliphate of them and her, with the former who is taking on the mantle of the hunter to provide for our community, even though she will get nothing but derision or even worse for it, should it be discovered that she is a girl, and the latter, who is the crown prince that does his father's bidding and kills those his father believes are challengers to his rule and its edicts. And next on his list, the man known only as the Hunter. We start the story with Nasir as a tool for his father's authoritarian rule, and the story follows an unraveling that would have these two characters bring everything crashing down. If, however, you want to reach for a manga for the readathon, then consider picking up Akame ga Kill by Takahiro and Tetsuya Tashiro, which takes authoritarianism to its full extreme with a government that publicly crucifies citizens with dissenting opinions in the capital city, even whilst taxing them heavily, depriving them of food and water, and forcing them into slavery. And our story follows Tatsumi, who arrives in the city from his village with the hope that he will be able to make some money to send back home, only to learn that things are not really as they seem, and the city might just be the most dangerous place of all. If Akame ga Kill is a bit too dark for you, however, then maybe you want to consider Psycho-Pass, which takes place in a cyberpunk authoritarian future where the government closely monitors the mental state of its citizens, and any citizen who is flagged as soon committing a potential crime is dealt with by the police. The levels of fucked up that this story had me at, but it's still slightly more tolerable than Akame ga Kill, at least to me. Now, nothing brings about the collapse of society as we know it than the rise of authoritarianism, and what other book perfectly captures that than the parable of the talents by Octavia E. Butler and her fight-seeing eye into the future, who had long predicted the present fuckery that the world is experiencing, and we see this in full display in the second Earth Seed book, which means there are a chunk of trigger warnings: rape, sexual assault, the molestation of a child, torture. It's not an easy read, but it is a necessary one. Now, to give you a little context on Nigerian history, Wole Soyinka, writer and the first African to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, was arrested without trial at the start of the Nigerian Civil War and held for 27 months in solitary confinement because of how vocal his protestations were to the then government. Amidst the torture, both mental and physical, he wrote and scribbled away while in the prison, proving to the world that people should be allowed the right to protest, and that no matter what is done, as long as they still live, that right can never be taken from them. The compilation of his notes in the 27 months he was in solitary confinement is what birthed The Man Died, Prison Notes of Wole Soyinka, which is a fantastic read. Countryside by Robert Jackson Bennett, meanwhile, is a heist novel that has our character contracted by the merchant houses who rule the city to steal an artifact that will give them power to not only control the city as they currently do, but they will have the power to rewrite the world itself to suit their whims. An authoritarian dream. And thus, it is up to our lead character, Sansia, to gather allies and fight, as no one else has the power to keep this from happening. And finally, the last book on the list is a book I haven't read yet, and I might pick up for this readathon because I have had it on my shelves for a while. The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh, inspired by 1001 Nights, which we all know follows an authoritarian with trust issues murdering innocent girls because he had gotten his heart broken previously. Until Scheherazade weaves a story for him every night, but always stops at a cliffhanger, which works as expected, and he spends her life for many nights to know how the stories end, and eventually falls in love with her and doesn't kill her. I know, the bar is in hell. And I honestly don't know how the Wrath and the Dawn will go either. If Shahrazad will murder Khalid in his sleep and take over his crown and kingdom, if it's all bad PR and isn't the one who has actually been killing his brides, or if, when we told Shahrazad, fuck authoritarianism, she took it literally.